The 9 Frontier Wars. 100 years of war between the Cape colonists and the Xhosa people of the Eastern Cape. One of the most prolonged struggles by African people against European intrusion. It ended in the annexation of Xhosa territories by the Cape Colony and the incorporation of its people. Let's quickly have a look at the date of the 9 Frontier Wars. The first Frontier War was from 1779 to 1781. Second Frontier War, 1789 to 1793. Third Frontier War, 1799 to 1803. Fourth Frontier War, 1811 to 1812. Fifth Frontier War, 1818 to 1819. Sixth Frontier War, 1834 to 1835. Seventh Frontier War, 1846 to 1847, and this was known as the Battle of the Axe. Eighth Frontier War, 1850 to 1853. The last Frontier War, the 9th Frontier War, was from 1877 to 1878. In the first three wars, frontier Dutch colonialists fought against members of several minor Xhosa chiefdoms that had moved westward from the main body of the Xhosa east of the Great Kai River into an area known as the Zuurveld, between the Great Fish and Boesman's rivers. These wars were caused by disagreements regarding the cattle trade that dominated the colonial economy, and they ended in a stalemate. For the colonialists, the third of these wars, in which the Xhosa were joined by an uprising of Khoisan servants who deserted their white masters, taking guns and horses, was particularly serious. British troops occupying the Cape during Napoleonic Wars appeared on the eastern frontier in 1811 in the Fourth War and drove the Xhosa from Zuurveld. Tensions east of the Great Fish River led to warfare on the frontier again in 1818 to 1819, both between sections of the Xhosa and between the British and the Xhosa and the Ndlambe and their prophet Makana. After this war, the territory between Great Fish and the Kaiskama was declared neutral, and the British government tried to clear it of its Xhosa inhabitants, but in vain. From this time, congestion on the land increased by the influx of Mfengu refugees from the Mfecane in Natal and the settlement of British colonists on the frontier in 1820 led to increased restlessness there. Ignoring previous agreements, the Xhosa occupied the neutral ground, and an act that prompted the Cape government in 1809 to send Lieutenant Colonel Richard Collins to tour the frontier areas. After touring the areas, he recommended that the Xhosa be expelled from the Zuurveld area, which should be secured by a dense white settlement, and that the area between the Fish and the Kaiskama rivers be unoccupied by black or white. In 1811, Colonel John Graham took the area with a mixed-race army. Subsequently, in January and February 1812, 20,000 Nonukwabes and Ndlambes were driven across the Fish River by British troops in conjunction with commandos from Swellendam, George Utenig and Graaf Reinet. Under the overall command of Lieutenant General John Graham, on the site of Colonel Graham's headquarters arose a town bearing his name, Grahamstown. Sir Charles Somerset made a verbal treaty with Gaika, the supposed paramount chief of the Western Xhosas. Unfortunately, this agreement between Sir Charles Somerset and Gaika helped provoke a quasi-nationalist movement among the Western Xhosa, led by the prophet Makana, which led to a renewal of the civil war between Gaika and Ndlambe. At Dembenek in 1818, he asked the Cape for help. Subsequently, colonial forces invaded Xhosa territory in December 1818 and triumphed over Ndlambe's warriors. When they left, however, Ndlambe was again able to defeat Gaika and then continued to occupy the colony and attack Grahamstown. In April 1819, the attack were repulsed and Cape forces defeated Ndlambe and marched as far as the Kai River. The Xhosa chiefs were obliged to recognize Geiger as paramount chief of the Western Xhosas, and he and Somerset made a verbal treaty that provided that the whole area between the Fish and the Kaiskama River, except for the Kyali Valley, which remained Xhosa territory, should be neutral zones close to both blacks and white occupation. On October 31st, 1834, a large force of some 12,000 Western Xhosas, led by Maqoma, the regent of the Geiger Xhosa tribe, Kyali, other Geiger chiefs, as well as some clans belonging to the Ndlambe branch, swept into the colony. Raiding parties devastated the country between the Witterberg and the sea. Piet Retief managed to defeat them in the Winterberg, and Lieutenant Colonel Harry Smith was immediately sent on his historic 6-day ride from Cape Town to Grahamstown to take command of the frontier. Reinforcements were sent by sea to Algoa Bay, and Burger and Khoi troops were called out. After a series of engagements, including that of Trumpeter's Drift on the Fish River, the chiefs fighting between the Sundays and Bushman's rivers were defeated, while the others, Maqoma, Kyali, and Umhala, retreated to the Amatole Mountains. Durban arrived at the frontier on 14 December 1834. He believed Hintsa, the chief of the Eastern Xhosa and presumed paramount over the whole Xhosa nation, to be responsible for the attack on the colony, and held him responsible for the theft of colonial stock captured during the invasion. Expulsion of the undefeated Xhosa from Queen Adelaide proved impossible. So in September 1835, Durban made treaties with the rebel chiefs, allowing them to remain in the locations there on condition of good behavior as British subjects, under the control of magistrates who, it was hoped, would be rapidly undermined by tribalism with missionary help. The Seventh Frontier War, the War of the Axe, began in March 1846 with the defeat at Burns Hill of a colonial force under Colonel John Hare. The colonial force invaded Xhosa territory following the ambush of a patrol sent to arrest a Xhosa accused of stealing an axe. The Xhosas retaliated by invading the colony and carrying off large numbers of cattle. Although the Mfengus cooperated with the colonial forces, who were able to defeat the Xhosas at Gwanga, June 1846, drought hampered the movement of the troops, and the attempt to defeat the tribes in the Amatole Mountains proved unsuccessful. Several tribes remained undefeated and able to conduct guerrilla operations, despite the scorched earth tactics of the Cape forces. Only in December 1847 did the last chief submit. In October 1850, Sandile, the principal Geiger chief, was deposed for refusing to attend a meeting of chiefs called by the governor. Subsequently, on 24 December, the Geigers attacked a colonial patrol at Buma Pass and destroyed 3 military villages. The Geigers received support from the Tembus and some Galekas. They were later joined by some rebellious black police and some Khoi from the Cat River settlement under Hermanus Mantrus and William Handler. By early 1852, Sir George Cathcart arrived at the Cape to replace Sir Harry Smith. Under his command, the war was vigorously pursued to its close. A combined force of regular troops under Generals H. Somerset and V. York continued a previous operation started in December 1851 and defeated Kreali. In September 1852, the Amatole region had been cleared of Geigers, and by November, the last Khoi rebels had been defeated. In 1858, Sir George Grey, convinced of Kreali's complicity in the cattle killings episode, sent an expedition to drive the Galegas beyond the Bashir River into Mbumvana land. The vacated Transkeian territory was at first administered as a dependency of the British. and annexed in March 1862. Locations were established there for Mfenkus at Butterworth and for some Ndlambes at Idutya. But the British government felt it would be too expensive to hold this new frontier, so disannexation back to the Khai occurred in 1864. The Gcalekas were forced to share their old lands with the Mfenkus, whom they despised. In August 1877, when tensions were high between the two tribes, a quarrel arising at a Mfengu wedding party provoked the ninth and last frontier war. The Cape Frontier Police under Colonel Charles Griffin crossed the Khai with a volunteer force to protect the Mfengus, and with aid of the Tembus and the Mfengus pushed the Gcalekas beyond the Mbashe River. But Sir Battle Freire, the High Commissioner, overthrown by Grely, and decided that Gcaleka land should be settled by whites and the Gcalekas disarmed once and for all. The Ninth War was soon over. In February 1878, Grely's forces were defeated at Ketani, and Grely surrendered in June. By then, Sandile had died, and an amnesty was granted to his followers. In 1879, Mfenguland and Idutya district were annexed to the Cape. The Gcaleka land, though not formally annexed, was administered by the Cape under the Chief Magistrate of the Transkei. By 1894, boundaries of the Cape had been peacefully extended to the Mtamvuna River by the piecemeal annexation of the remaining nominally independent areas.